Below are some interesting facts about domicile that we have discovered through our extensive research on this subject. Domicile is based on where you currently live or have lived in the past. You can't choose a domicile in a place that you have never physically been to. Domicile is a voluntary choice that only you can make. It acts as the equivalent of a protection contract between you and the government. All such contracts require your voluntary consent, which the above definition calls intent. The intent expresses itself as allegiance to the people and the laws of the place where you maintain a domicile. Thus, the court has frequently held that domicile or residence, more substantial than mere presence in transit or sojourner, is an adequate basis for taxation, including income, property, and death tax. Since the 14th Amendment makes one a citizen of the state wherein he resides, the fact of residence creates universally reciprocal duties of protection by the state and of allegiances and support by the citizens. The latter obviously includes a duty to pay taxes, and their nature and measure is largely a political matter. Of course, the situs of the property may tax it regardless of the citizenship, domicile, or residence of the owner. The most obvious illustration being a tax on realty laid by the state in which the realty is located. Now, it's very important for you guys to comprehend this. Real estate and property are not land, first and foremost. And secondly, you aren't the fucking owner of the real estate and property. And I can prove this to you. Just simply take your ass down to your register of deeds and look at the deed, whether it's a warranty deed, joint tenancy deed, trust deed, don't give a shit what kind of deed it is. And if you will take great pleasure and pride in reading and giving it a proper assessment, you will quickly find out that you are a tenant on that. And not even that you are a tenant, because the name that is on the joint tenancy deed, the warranty deed, any other deed for that matter, is always going to be a false and fictitious misnomer, a false and fictitious name, okay? Through unlawful conversion, they convert buyer owner who entered into a contract under your true full legal name, they're going to convert it into an all capital letter name, creating a trust. Okay, so you don't own it. That invokes Title 18, subsection 8, all obligations are obligations of the United States, because the United States is technically holding all the assets, property, and real estate, okay, which makes it their obligation. If I'm just a mere tenant, then who's the owner? That's the real dispute in all of this. Who is the owner if I'm just a tenant? It says right here I'm a tenant. I've got the evidence that it's this all capital name is just a tenant. Nowhere on this warranty deed, joint tenancy deed, grant deed does specifically relay that I am the owner with my full legal name on it at all. So that begs the question, who is the owner of this property responsible for the taxes? Under Title 18, subsection 8, all obligations are obligations of the United States under military occupation under the Reorganization Act of 1871, being entitled, they are responsible for it, okay? Let's move on. Domicile cannot be established without a coincidence of living or having lived in a place and voluntarily consenting to live permanently. Well, your existence on this earth is not permanent. From the day you're born, we know that you're going to die, which means you don't have permanent residency here. Domicile is protected is a First Amendment protected choice of political association. Since the government may not lawfully interfere with your right of association, Article 1, Section 10 of the United States Constitution, also Article 1, Section 16 of the Nebraska Constitution, okay, and every state constitution has the same thing, where it says that the government cannot intrude in your private affairs to contract. You have the unlimited ability to contract, which means you also have the unlimited ability not to contract, which also means you have the unlimited ability to create trusts at will, okay? Very important for you to understand that. With your right of association, they cannot lawfully select a domicile for you or interfere with your choice of domicile. However, in the public for-profit courts, the lawyers, the lying, looting, pandering, shitbag, fucking piles of shit, are able to presume and assume that, one, you're a resident of the county, and two, that you're a resident of the state. And if you do not combat that on the original pleadings, which are insufficient pleadings because they're not sworn to under the pains and penalties of perjury, and they're not affirmed with an affidavit by an affiant stating harm, damage, loss, injury, the who, what, when, where, why, and how it all came to be. Okay, so it's insufficient pleadings and all criminal matters, which are really civil matters. They're civil in nature. They're not criminal. They're civil. And how do I prove that? Under CFR 277211, all crimes are commercial. It's a commercial compact. It's a commercial contract. It's something that you entered into unwittingly, unknowingly, without full disclosure. Nobody ever told you that by claiming a domicile, by saying that you're a resident, by saying that you're an inhabitant, that you are naturally associated with volunteering to Title 28, 3002, 15A, B, and C, and its subsidiary corporations. Okay? You were not provided full disclosure. That's a denial of due process of law. Period. Cut, fucking, and dry. Just merely being present on the land doesn't mean that you're subject to their whims based upon the fact that you're physically there. Okay? In order to have this statutory citizenship, you had to either voluntarily contract into it or physically be born within a 10 square mile area of Washington, D.C., making you a subject to it. Okay? And even that is questionable because that can be combated as well, because Virginia and Maryland seceded land to create Washington, D.C. Eventually, one of the states retracted from that deal. And so technically, I don't even think it's 10 square miles anymore, but that's what they would lead us to believe. But I believe one of the states actually had a disagreement, and they actually retracted the land that they had once given or granted to the establishment known as Washington, D.C. As you know, there's only 50 stars, not 51, which means Washington, D.C., District of Columbia, is not a fucking state. It is foreign to you and I. It is foreign to the Union of States. It is foreign, ladies and gentlemen. It is, for all intents and purposes, a corporation. Domicile is a protected First Amendment choice of political association, since the government may not lawfully interfere with your right of association. They cannot lawfully select a domicile for you or interfere with your choice of domicile. Because again, to domicile would be to contract in to their the corporation voluntarily and be subject to their private for-profit laws, racketeering fucking schemes, taxation without representation. All right, are you paying attention? Domicile is what is called the seat of your property. It is the state and the government you voluntarily nominate to protect your property and your rights. In effect, it is the weapon you voluntarily choose that will best protect your property and rights, not unlike the weapons that early caveman crafted and voluntarily used to protect themselves and their property. The government cannot lawfully coerce you to choose a domicile in a place. A government that coerced you into choosing a domicile in their jurisdiction is engaging in a protection racket, okay, which is highly illegal. A coerced domicile, it is not a domicile of your choice and therefore lawfully confers no jurisdiction or rights upon the government. Similarly, when a person is prevented from leaving his domicile by circumstances not of his doing and beyond his control, he may be relieved of the consequences attendant on domicile at that place. In Robo's USDC DC 1963, Robos v. Kennedy 219 F Superior Court 892 DDC 1963, page 24, a federal statute was involved which precluded the return of an alien's property if he was found to be domiciled in Hungary prior to a certain date. It was found that Hungary was Nazi-controlled at the time in question and that the person involved would have left Hungary and lost domicile there had they been able to. Since they had been precluded from leaving because of the political privatization imposed by the very government they wanted to escape, the father was imprisoned there, the court would not hold them to have lost their property based on a domicile that circumstances beyond their control forced them to retain. Conflicts in a Nutshell, 2nd edition, David D. Siegel, West Publishing, 1994, ISBN 0314-02952-4, page 24. Domicile is a method of lawfully delegating authority to a sovereign to protect you. That delegation of authority causes you to voluntarily surrender some of your rights to the government in exchange for protection. That protection comes from the civil and criminal laws that the sovereign passes, because the purpose of all government and all law is protection. The U.S. Supreme Court calls this delegation of authority allegiance, to wit. Allegiance and protection by the government from harm are, in this connection, reciprocal obligations. The one is a compensation for the other, allegiance for protection, and protection for allegiance. Minor versus Happersett, 88 U.S. 21 Wall 162, 166-168, 1874. All allegiances must be voluntary, which is why only consenting adults past the age of majority can have a legal domicile. The following facts confirm this conclusion. 8.1. Minors cannot choose a domicile, but by law assume that the domicile of their parents. 8.2. Incompetent or insane persons assume the domicile of their caregivers. It is perfectly lawful to have a domicile in another place than the place you currently live. Those who find themselves in this condition are called transient foreigners, and the only laws they are subject to are the criminal laws in the place they are at. Transient foreigners, one who visits the country without the intention of remaining. Black's Law Dictionary, 6th edition, page 1498. There are many complicated rules of presumption about how to determine the domicile of an individual. You can read these rules at the website 28 Corpus Juris Secundum, CGS Domicile, 2003. The reason that the above publication about domicile is so complicated and long is that its main purpose is to distinguish the voluntary consensual nature of domicile or remove it entirely from the decision of the courts and governments, so that simply being present on the king's land makes one into a subject of the king. This is not how a republican form of government works, and we don't have a monarchy in this country that would allow this abusive approach to law to function. Yet, it is to be remembered, and that whether in its real origin or in its artificial state, allegiance as well as fealty rests upon lands, and it is due to persons. Not so with respect to citizenship, which has arisen from the dissolution of the feudal system and is a substitute for allegiance, corresponding with the new order of things. Allegiance and citizenship differ indeed. In almost every characteristic, citizenship is the effect of a compact contract. Allegiance is the offspring of power and necessity. Citizenship is a political tie. Allegiance is a territorial tenor. Citizenship is the character of equity. Allegiance is a badge of inferiority. Citizenship is constitutional. Allegiance is personal. Citizenship is freedom. Allegiance is servitude. Citizenship is communicable. Allegiance is repulsive. Citizenship may be relinquished. Allegiance is perpetual. With such essential differences, the doctrine of allegiance is inapplicable to a system of citizenship, which it can neither serve to control nor to elucidate. Elucidate, I believe is the word. E-L-U-C-I-D-A-T-E. Elucidate. And yet, even among the nations in which the law of allegiance is the most firmly established, the law most perniciously enforced, there are striking deviations that demonstrate the invisible power of truth. And the homage which under every modification of government must be paid to the inherent rights of man. The doctrine is that allegiance cannot be due to two sovereigns, and taking an oath of allegiance to a new is the strongest evidence of withdrawing allegiance from a previous sovereign. That's Talbot versus James 3 U.S. 133, 1795, from the syllabus, but not the opinion. These rules of presumption relating to domicile may only lawfully act in the absence of the express declaration of your domicile provided to the government in written form, or when various sources of evidence conflict with each other about your choice of domicile. This government right of domicile, he continues, is not established unless the person makes sufficiently known his intention of fixing there, either tacitly or by an express declaration. VAT law, NAT, PP 9293, Feng Yu Ting versus United States, 149 U.S. 698, 1893. The purpose for these rules is basically to manufacture the presumption that courts can use to assume or presume that you consented to their jurisdiction, even if, in fact, you did not explicitly do so. All such prejudicial presumptions which might adversely affect your constitutionally guaranteed rights are unconstitutional according to the U.S. Supreme Court. 1/8 conclusive presumption affecting protected interest. A conclusive presumption may be defeated where its application would impair a party's constitutionally protected liberty or property interest. In such cases, conclusive presumptions have been held to violate a party's due process and equal protection rights. Vlandis versus Klein, 1973, 412, U.S. 441, 449, 93, S period, CT period, 2230, 2235, Cleveland, BD of ED v. Lafleur, 1974, 414, U.S. 632, 639, 640, 94, S period, CT period, 1208, 1215, presumption under Illinois law that unmarried fathers are unfit violates process. Federal Civil Trials and Evidence, 2005, Rudder Group, paragraph 8, 4993, page 8K-34. I blow my nose. Hold on. The purpose for these complicated rules of presumption is to void the real issue, which is whether you voluntarily consent to a civil statutory jurisdiction of the government and the courts in an area. Because they cannot proceed civilly without your express consent manifested as a voluntary choice of domicile, in most cases, if litigants knew that all they had to do to void the jurisdiction of the court was to not voluntarily select a domicile within the jurisdiction of the court, most people would become transient foreigners. So the government could not do nothing other than just leave them alone. You can choose a domicile any place you want, so long as you have physically been present in that place at least once in the past. The only requirement is that you must ensure that the government or sovereign who controls the place where you live has received reasonable notice of your choice of domicile and of their corresponding obligation to protect you. The writers upon the law of nations distinguish between a temporary residence in a foreign country for a special purpose and a residence accompanied with an intention to make it a permanent place of abode. The latter is styled by Vattel, V-A-T-T-E-L, in his book, The Law of Nations, as domicile, which he defines to be a habitation fixed in any place with an intention of always staying there. Such a person, says this author, becomes a member of the new society at least as a permanent inhabitant, and is a kind of citizen of the inferior order from the native citizen, but is nevertheless united and subject to the society, without participating in all its advantages. This right of domicile, he continues, is not established unless the person makes sufficiently known his intention of fixing there either tacitly or by an express declaration. VAT law, NAT, PP 9293, gratuitous now here, or nowhere, uses the word domicile, but he also distinguishes between those who stay in a foreign country by the necessity of their affairs or from any other temporary cause, and those who reside there from a permanent cause, from a permanent cause. The former he denominates strangers and the latter subjects. The rule is thus laid down by Sir Robert Fillimore. There is a class of persons which cannot be, strictly speaking, included in either of these denominations of naturalized or native citizens, namely, the class of those who have ceased to reside, maintain a domicile in their native country, and have taken up a permanent abode in another. These are domiciled inhabitants. They have not put on a new citizenship through some formal mode enjoyed by the law or the new country. They are de facto, though not de jure, citizens of the country of their new chosen domicile. Feng Yu Ting versus United States, 149 U.S. 698, 1893. Notice the phrase, this right of domicile is not established unless the person makes sufficiently known his intention of fixing thereto, either tacitly or by an express declaration. The purpose of notifying the government that you have nominated them as your protector occurs based on how you fill out usually government and financial forms that you fill out, such as driver's license application. You cannot get a driver's license in most states without selecting a domicile in the place that you want the license from. Voter registration, you cannot register to vote without a domicile in the place you are voting. Jury summons, you cannot serve as a jurist without a domicile in the jurisdiction you are serving in. On financial forms, any form that asks for your residence, permanent address, or domicile, if you want to provide unambiguous legal notices to the state of your choice to disassociation with them and become a transient foreigner in the place where you live, who is not subject to the civil laws, you can use the following free forms. We emphasize that there is no method other than domicile available in which to consent to the civil statutory laws of a specific place. None of the following conditions, for instance, may form a basis for a prima facie presumption that a specific human being consented to be civilly governed by a specific municipal government. Simply being born and thereby becoming a statutory national per Title 8 U.S.C. subsection 1101A21 of a specific country is not an exercise of personal discretion or an express act of consent. Simply living in a physical place without choosing a domicile, there is not an exercise of personal discretion or an express act of consent. The subject of domicile is a complicated one. Consequently, we have written a separate memorandum of law on the subject if you would like to investigate the fascinating subject further. Effects of domicile on civil statutory status. The law of domicile is almost exclusively the means of determining one's civil status under the civil statutory laws of a given territory. Subsection 29, status. It may be laid down that the status, or as it is sometimes called, civil status, in contradictions to political status of a person depends largely, although not universally, upon domicile. The older jurist whose opinions are fully collected by Story, I. and Berg, B-U-R-G-E, maintained with few exceptions the principles of the ubiquity of status conferred by the Lex Domicilii, spelled with two I's at the end, with little qualification. Lord Westbury in Undy versus Undy thus states that the doctrine broadly, the civil status is governed by one single principle, namely that of domicile, which is the criterion established by the law for the purpose of determining civil status. For it is on this basis that the personal rights of the party, that is to say, the law which determines his majority and minority, his marriage, succession, testacy, or intestacy, must depend. Gray CJ in the mid-late Massachusetts case of Ross versus Ross, speaking with specific reference to capacity to inherit, says, "It is a general principle that the status or condition of a person, the relation in which he stands to another person, and by which he is qualified or made capable to take certain rights in that other's property, is fixed by the law of the domicile, and that this status and capacity are to be recognized and upheld in every other state, so far as they are not inconsistent with its own laws and policies. A treatise on the law of domicile, national, quasi-national, and municipal, M.W. Jacobs, Little Brown and Company, 1887, page 89. Now, because of my prior studies, I recognize Little and Brown, okay? Little and Brown is a book on some treaties. You can find it, and they are absolutely admissible in all courts. I don't give a fuck if it's a lower state court or a federal court or the Supreme Court. Doesn't matter. Little and Brown's book on treaties and the law is absolutely applicable. So you should all go out and check out that book. Make sure to pick it up. It's a beautiful thing, okay? Treaties are more powerful than constitutions. And I learned that in Summa Corp versus the state of California. That was graciously pointed out to me by Mr. Anonymous. Again, I learned from a bunch of very articulate savants whose IQ are off the fucking charts, all right? And he pointed out Summa Corp versus the state of California, and in the conclusion, it basically states that the treaties of this nation supersede the constitutions of the state and the federal constitution, and thus invoke the United States military to intervene and to protect anybody engaged in mixed war against the constitutions or violating the treaties of this land. All right. So treaties are way up there, ladies and gentlemen. They're above the Constitution. And you can review that case, Summa Corp versus the state of California, where it was a land grab that was taking place and it was shut down post haste really fucking quickly because the DOD would have actually had to move in on the judge for rendering a piss poor decision and engaging in mixed war against the treaties, which would have violated the Constitution and the treaties simultaneously. But in the conclusion, they were saying how the treaties even supersede the state constitution. Super important, poignant point. And that's what's so beautiful about treaties. And that's why my Native friends, my Native American friends, are constantly like, Derrick, go back to your tribe, dude. You got a tribe here. Go back to your tribe. Get linked up with your tribe. We're protected by treaties. Our treaties are enforceable, and they do supersede all this bullshit civil statutory hoopla, okay? And they're constantly sending me information about it. I just haven't quite made the connection, the link, all right? But I understand what they're saying. I get it. So if you can tie yourself back to being a native on the land and find your tribe, because essentially reservations, reservations in and of themselves are their own fucking countries, okay? And they're protected by treaty. And each state of the union is its own nation. It's its own fucking country, okay? It's the Union of Nations for a reason. But with that said, I'm going to continue on. The key thing to understand about all franchises is that the congressionally created privileges or public rights, okay, anytime it's a public right, a privilege, that's all cockamamie horse shit that was drummed up by these assholes that think they lord over you and are giving you options of benefits, okay, privileges. If they can give it to you, it means they can take it away. Remember when you was a young 16-year-old adolescent and you wanted to go on a hot date and Papa promised you the car, you know, the old hot rod y'all had been working on in the shop, you 4-barrel, slap shift, you was going to go out and burn some rubber in more than one way, right? But on Thursday night, you did something that pissed off the old man. And Papa give you the keys, and Papa taketh away the keys, right? And now all of a sudden, your date's wondering why you don't want to go on a date anymore, because you ain't got a hot, slick set of wheels anymore. You're not going to be smelling naturally aspirated gas through a carburetor and burnt rubber in more than 2 ways, or more than 1 way, right? And so you're just not so apt to go pick up your girlfriend on a bicycle because you fucked up. That's privileges. Daddy give it, Daddy take it away. That's just as plain and as simple as I can fucking put it, all right? So, They enforce attach to specific statuses under them. An example of such statuses includes person or individual, alien, non-resident alien, driver, under the vehicle code of your state, driver, spouse under the family code of your state, which is for the family court. I go into all that stuff in a couple different classes that I've had in the past about how when you get a marriage license, you're actually marrying three entities. You're practicing polygamy, which is a violation of your First Amendment right, your right to your religion. I don't know about your religion, but mine doesn't condone being married to three different parties and being screwed predominantly by one all the fucking time identified as the state. Okay, where they go in and they enter into a bunch of fucking contracts because of the merger of titles, okay, through the marriage, the nuptial, which is a contract. And so in divorce, people come to me all the time and ask me, oh, she filed for divorce or he filed for divorce. What should I do? Hammer their ass for breach of fucking contract. They get nothing. You said until death do us part. And they broke the nuptial. They broke the trust agreement. They have caused you injury. They have caused you harm, damage, and loss. Tell them to fuck off. They get what they get. What's theirs is theirs. What yours is yours. And the state can kiss your ass because they didn't provide full disclosure. When you entered into that contract, they didn't say that they were going to enter you into a bunch of fucking programs. Okay? So that's how you can dissolve all that horse shit in pretty short order. Taxpayer under the Internal Revenue Code at Title 26 USC subsection 7701A14 and citizen, resident, or inhabitant under the civil laws of your state. Okay? The above civil statutory statuses, that's what I just read to you. Those words are all indicative and equivocally tied to being a resident, subject, serf, pauper, tied to Title 28, 3002, 15A. Okay, A, B, and C. Everybody always leaves B and C off. And as I read further, I was like, why do they leave B and C off? B and C also reaffirms A, even more so. So go read it again. Title 28, 3002, 15A, B, and C. Okay, so that was the above. Now, the below are contingent for their existence on a domicile in the geographical place or territory that the law applies to. Hence, a non-resident alien or even alien civil status within the Internal Revenue Code, for instance, only applies if one is physically present on federal territory or consensually domiciled there. If you are not physically on federal territory and not domiciled there and not representing a public office or an officer domiciled there, you cannot be anything under the Internal Revenue Code. Are temporary because your domicile can change. Boom, 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 boom. Extinguish when you terminate. Whoops. Boom, boom, boom. Extinguish when you terminate your domicile and or your presence in that place. 4 are the very same statuses you find on all government forms and applications, such as voter registration, driver's license applications, marriage license applications, etc. License applications, etc. The purpose of filling out all such applications is to contract to procure the status indicated on the form and have it recognized by the government grantor who created the privilege you are pursuing under the civil law franchise that implement the form or application. Okay? My look on it. If God didn't give it to me, I probably shouldn't have it. If God didn't offer it to me, then I'm not going to accept it. I don't want to accept your privileges and your benefits and bear the burdens of your cockamamie fucking schemes to screw people left and fucking right and be a subservient slave, serf, pauper to a sinister organization that continues to rob people left and fucking right. They're worse than the fucking mob. Look, I've said it in court before. Under oath. I've done business with the fucking mob before. And even the mob does business more honorably than you fucking cretins. And the judge was just like, oh my God, holy shit. I can't believe he admitted that. Yeah, that you guys are absolute fucking shitbags. Shitbags. Because at least those people were fucking honorable. There was an agreement made. The agreements and valuable consideration were made on both parts. And the contract was fulfilled. And we washed our hands of shit. All right? Bing, just as it should be. That's exactly what it should be with government as well. But that's never really the case. It's never really the case with government. They always take and take and take and want to take a little bit more and never want to give anything fucking back. The only way to avoid contracting into a civil franchise if you are forced to fill out a government form is to. Now remember, I have my own reservations on being forced to do anything. You can hold a gun to my head and tell me to suck a dick, and I'm going to tell you to fucking pull the trigger, because I'm not sucking a dick. It's just not happening, okay? So nobody really can force you to do anything. Now, people go, well, great, Derrick, so you're not a cocksucker, but you're a dead motherfucker that doesn't suck dick. Yes, I may be dead, but again, I had a fucking choice. I had a choice. You always have a fucking choice. All right? The choices might not be desirable, but you always have a choice. Nobody can force you to do anything. This was one of the hardest lessons one of my mentors showed me in a court, and it was so devastating to me because I said, James, if I don't sign, I'm going to jail. They're going to put me in a fucking cage. And he goes, Derrick, you have a choice. Although neither of the options are really desirable, you do have a choice, and you can't say that you didn't consent if you sign, because you don't have to sign. Now, here's the catch-22. They put you in jail based upon the failed performance that you won't sign. Now, they've encroached upon your unalienable rights. But again, I want to err on the side of caution, Derrick. It will be very, very, very fucking hard for you to enforce against them with their own court system, with their own structure in place, to get any of them criminally prosecuted for forcing you to enter into a contract or for taking you to jail for not entering into a contract. Good luck. I'm going to tell you right now, it's damn near impossible. And this man is a genius. I have watched him walk all over these people. He has never, ever, ever once successfully sued a single fucking one of them. And he is absolutely brilliant. I have watched lawyers walk into a courtroom and sit down just because he's there, just to watch him work, because he is just magnificent at what he does. And he knows this system in and out. And he was very quick to tell me, you always have a choice. And although the options for you may not be desirable, know this: you must be a man of sound doctrine and sound principle and never waver. Stand for what you believe in, no matter what the consequences are. Stand true and correct. And if they put you in a cage for it, then at least you can still sleep at night, because you did exactly what you said you were going to do. You're a man of honor. And that is something that this land, this country, the world over is lacking, is people that stand with conviction. So I didn't sign. My happy ass went to fucking jail. I wasn't very happy about it, but the point of the matter is I stood with conviction on my beliefs. Okay. Could I go after him? Sure I could. You know, I had a prosecutor ask me, why don't you go after these cops? I mean, it's very clear they violated the law. Yeah, right. Why don't you prosecute them? You're a fucking prosecutor. They broke the fucking law. Don't you uphold the law? Aren't you responsible for making sure criminals don't get away with criminal fucking acts? And if I exonerate myself in the fucking court case, don't you equally and oppositely assume the responsibility of saying that they're the criminal, since I've clearly cleared myself of being criminal or being engaged in any criminal activity? Yeah, but unfortunately, Derrick, that's not how it works. My job is to protect them. My job is to protect the sheriff's department and the police department. I'm not responsible for persecuting them for breaking the law. My job is actually to protect them if they should break the law. Ah, so justice be damned then. Is that correct? Yes, that's correct. My mother was standing right there when this conversation was fucking had. She was in absolute disbelief. She, at that point, I think, is when she finally realized why I'm so passionate about putting my fucking foot up their damn asses. Because they are the most complete narcissistic group of motherfuckers I've ever met in my life. And they're consequently the only people I just can't beat the fucking shit out of. And trust me, Lord willing, I would. Give me enough strength and I absolutely fucking would. But doing that only brings a fuck ton more of agents down on me, to the point where even beating the shit out of them wouldn't give me the gratification, because it would absolutely fix nothing. It would fix nothing. It's not like beating the shit out of the school bully who likes to put his hands on women in the gym, or dragging him out of his classroom and beating the shit out of him in the hallway. And Lord knows I've done a lot of that in my days. All right? It's not like that. You put your hands on these people, and they have other criminals that are hell-bent on protecting their investment, on enforcing shit upon you, and giving the presumption and assumption that it's justice, and making the community conform to it, and almost praise them. You wouldn't believe how many people, when a guy says, I'm a judge, I know the law, and people go, oh, Derrick, he's the judge. He knows the law. Oh, yeah. He knows the law because ignorance of the law damn sure doesn't excuse me. So it absolutely does not excuse somebody who's been to 7 years of law school and a bunch of other fucking classes and comp fucking seminars and everything else. There's no doubt he knows the law. But under the law of military occupation, under the law of necessity, they're allowed to fucking lie to you. Period. Without any fucking consequences. They are allowed to lie. Don't believe me? Go ask a fucking cop. They'll tell you in their training they're allowed to lie. But you lie to one of them, you're interfering with an official investigation, and now you're subject to criminal penalties for you, either holding back information, providing false information. Yeah, it's a double standard. They're the most narcissistic group of motherfuckers I've ever met in my life. Now, I do have some agents in agency that are, well, we're acquaintances. We'll go that far. I think that if push came to shove, they'd be on the right side of things. But realistically, we already are at push come to shove. I mean, if you look at where we're at now and where we're headed, the crash that is coming, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to tell you this right now. People out there buying houses, absolutely fucking fools. Absolute fools. In 2008, 2007 was the exact same thing that happened in 1908, 1907. Okay, the exact same thing. If you look at it economically, banking structured wise, I'm not an economist. I'm not anybody fucking brilliant in that aspect. I just read a little bit here and there. I study what's going on. I studied the fall of Rome. I see how it's working. History repeats itself. In 2008, we were warned that if the system doesn't crash now, what comes and what follows later will be catastrophic and will pale in comparison to the crash of 1929, 1928, 1930, okay, the dirty 30s. What I'm trying to articulate to you is the crash, the economic crash that is coming is going to be so fucking gnarly. Breadlines will look like a fucking concert, an AC/DC concert. It's going to be fucking ridiculous, and it's fucking coming. So batten down the hatches, get your shit wired tight, keep your head on a swivel, keep your friends and your family safe, talk to your local farmers, subsidize your energy. You want help from a farmer? You want to be able to hunt on his land? Go help him fix fucking fence. That's the best way you could ever get permission to be able to hunt or gather eggs or whatever. You want him to raise some chickens for you? Maybe strike a deal with him about fixing fence, cleaning out the snow out of his driveway in the winter, because a lot of these old-time farmers, they don't have 9, 10 kids to help them on this farm anymore, and they need that help. So that's just a little bit of knowledge from a guy who grew up around people out in the country where we naturally help one another. I grew up in an area where if one farmer died, there were a dozen farmers that pulled together to harvest his crop for his family and make sure the wife and the kids were taken care of. And I think that happens everywhere throughout the world in the United States, especially, but more so prevalent in the Midwest. It's something that always occurs without question. Even seeing farmers that haven't been killed in the operation of cultivation or whatever, but maybe broke a leg, broke an arm, and are struggling, the community pulls together and makes sure that what needs to be done is done and taken care of. And that's the kind of communities that we need to manifest into existence throughout the nation. As far as city folk, I don't know how you do that. The city mentality is way different than the culture that I was immersed in. And I'm very thankful for the upbringing I had because of that. That made me a very well-rounded individual, and perhaps leads to why I do so much of this, which may or may not help any of you, but I do it in good faith with clean hands in the hopes that some of this knowledge reaches you, at least in your heart, and gives you the strength to push on and persevere, because this is it's difficult. There are times waking up in the morning, you're looking around and go, what the fuck am I doing all this shit for? Who's it helping? Is anybody learning? Is anybody listening? Is this going to affect positive change. You know, you look at Edward Snowden, you ask people throughout the country how many people think he's a criminal, and most of them would say he's a criminal. And I think that Edward Snowden is a fucking hero. He's a fucking hero. He's an American hero, and he should be put in a history book that way. All he did was simply tell the truth about how the government was spying on you, and the only government that really listens to you is the NS motherfucking A. All right? And he was very open about it. And then you look at who's the other gentleman that is now, and he's been there in that situation as a political prisoner for some time. And I can't think of his name for the life of me. He's another whistleblower that ran WikiLeaks. Julian Assange, another fucking hero. Another hero. and people just don't get it. Mark my words, the reason Julian Assange has not been prosecuted is because the news media would actually have to step in, because it would be an infringement on them. And if they didn't step up to the plate to protect Julian Assange for disseminating information that was given to him, it's not like he hacked into any database and stole secret information or classified information. That information was leaked to him, okay? And then he had that information in his hands and was able to give it away to the people. So effectively, if they try to prosecute Julian Assange, what ends up happening is either the news media has to show its ugly fucking face for what it really is, which is a private for-profit controlled MK Ultra tool and device to manipulate the mindless masses, or they would actually have to step up on behalf of Julian Assange and say, look, you can't infringe on the First Amendment. We have the right to report the freedom of press. This was leaked to him. He didn't extract it from the military. He didn't hack the NSA. He didn't hack the government in order to get this information. And I think that's one of the reasons you'll never see Julian Assange ever be arraigned. Ever. I don't think it'll ever fucking happen, but they will forever hold him as a political prisoner under the National Defense Authorization Act, which stipulates that all of us are technically domestic terrorists. Why? Because in there it's so vague and ambiguous about its terms and conditions. Anybody that has more than 7 days of food rations and ample ammunition is considered a domestic terrorist. Well, first of all, what constitutes ample ammunition? It's so vague and ambiguous. Is that one shell or is it 50? Is it certain calibers, or what is it exactly? Ample ammunition. Who the fuck defines that? And secondly, 7 days worth of food rations. Most people don't go to the grocery store every day, because we all know that if the truckers stopped running in 3 weeks' time, in less than 3 weeks' time, there would be sheer pandemonium. You shut down the truckers throughout the United States delivering goods and services to the stores, and the store shelves would be empty within a week or two's time. Okay? You'd be cuckoo, cuckoo, and screwed. So everybody's got, or should have, more than at least 7 days worth of ration of food. Okay? That's just indicative of survival. Anyway, with that said, when we come back, we're going to be talking about the only way to avoid contracting in the civil franchise if you are forced to fill out government forms is to, we're going to go bust out about 10 of them with some Supreme Court cases in support to help you guys out. And we're also going to be talking about the things that we wish to emphasize about this important subject are the following very important facts. And I think there's about 10 or 15 of those important facts that tell you your status under the civil statutory law is exclusively determined by the exercise of your private, unalienable right to both contract and association. So when we come back, probably be in the morning by that time, kind of burning the midnight oil here. I've got a court case that I have to be at tomorrow. So I don't know if I'll get this done tonight or tomorrow morning, but needless to say, thank you very much, everybody. And we still have to discuss the 3 defined definitions for the United States as per the Supreme Court cases, which is coming up. We're still getting to it. We're still about 10 pages off from that explanation that will undoubtedly help you guys. So thank you very much. Appreciate your time, and thank you for all your love and support.